Previously on Weird Planet. I don't like it here. It gives me the creeps. It looks too good to be real here. I have a nasty feeling that any moment the whole setup may turn into a nightmare. Great horned Diacolitedons! It's a woman, and a Venusian one at that. There's only one chance to get airborne again. We'll have to patch up the leaking fuel tanks and try to make the moon. By tomorrow, she will be nearer to Zilda than any other time this month. Help! For God's sake, shoot this thing! His voice was muffled into an unintelligible choking gasp as the huge flower chalice engulfed his head like a cap. And when the petals opened and the tendrils uncurled like fingers, there was nothing left of the being who was Ludo Lorenzo. Let's make for the ship. It's our only chance, Casimir Quain ordered briefly, as the plant, shivering gluttonously, huddled over its ghastly meal. The rest are starting to attack. They made for the open door of the Articus at the double, and only just in the nick of time. As the 9 men and girls scrambled into the ship, they saw through the foot-thick perspex windows a solid wall of green advancing towards them from the jungle shadows. The cannibal plants had woken up and were ready for breakfast. They are quite harmless at night, Lunara explained, crouching beside Quain in the cramped interior of the ship, and sleep from sunset till dawn. At other times they are kept off by fires, for like all primitive structures they are afraid of it, but owing to the euvonium in their makeup, they are unaffected by atomic rays, so blasters can wound but not disintegrate them. How does Thorson control his nasty little pets then? Asked Carter, curiously, as he loaded the 4 turret. There must be some way of destroying them. Lunara nodded. Euvonium in excess of the normal injection can cause the plants to devolutionize back to seeds again, she explained. And the same effect would take place in the case of Thorson himself. He rejuvenates himself with euvonium doses, but an overdose could transform him into a primitive one-celled amoeba in no time. Plants, which apparently had no organised plan of action among themselves, now began to emerge more clearly from the surrounding shadows in the daylight. They looked withered and droopy about the leaves, as if without their meal of human flesh they could not keep up their strength. Waving tendrils, curling blindly in the air at first, finally focused on the silver cigar-shaped body of the Articus, lying in the Zildan clearing like some huge, stranded silvery fish from the oceans beyond the rim. Uttering faint hissings and whistlings of triumph and greed, the plants, their plate-shaped or bell-shaped flesh-coloured flower heads swaying blindly to sense their victims, shuffled through the dust towards the Articus. "Okay, let them have it," commanded Quain, as the first greenish tendril fumbled blindly over the windows, trying to find an opening. With an ear-splitting crash and rattle, the atomic shot peppered the plant monsters, drilling milliards of holes in the thick, fibrous stems and blotchy, fleshy leaves. But though a purple sap poured from the wounds and darkened the windows with its stain, the plants still continued to writhe and twist in vain like serpents trying to crush the fabric of the ship or find an opening in its silvery armour. "If we can hold out till sunset, we'll be saved," Lunara whispered encouragingly. "They must sleep at dusk until dawn, or they will die." More and more plants of varying sizes were pouring towards the clearing, spilling over each other in a tangle of roots and leaves in their hurry to join the expected banquet. "Good old Cantel, architect of the 3 cities," muttered Quain after an hour of this. "He told me the Articus would stand up to any pressure, from the gravitational pull of Cerebus to an atomic meteorquake, but he never guessed in a million moons when he built her that she'd have to stand up to this." It seemed more like a dozen centuries instead of many hours before the sun began to sink behind the purple rim of the crater behind the jungle. "Now they're giving up and going off," Lunara said gleefully, pointing to a patch of light on the window pane as the green mass slowly and reluctantly slithered to the ground. Soon the flowers, heads drooping wearily, leaves, tendrils and petals furling for sleep, began to move backwards into the jungle, and the clearing was deserted. "We'll light a circle of fire to keep the ship safe and go to the lake," suggested Quain as, Armed with blasters and a portable periscopic visualizer for detecting uvonium deposits, and metal containers to carry the precious ore, the party set off towards the crater, circling the jungle to avoid sleeping plants. "Move as quietly as possible," Lunara warned them, as they followed her through the sparse and withered grass beyond the jungle towards the black humped outline of the crater walls. For Thorson, unlike his creations, sleeps in the light and wakes in darkness. He had tunnelled his cave below the surface of the Uvonium lake, she told them in whispers, and fed himself on the edible fungus growing on the walls or roots and berries he gathered by moonshine in the scrub at the crater bottom. He had kept her close prisoner until recently in his underground cave, until she had found how to dope him with the intoxicating juices of the narcotic root. "I saw your ship land just where my father's did 6 moon changes back," she told them in a whisper. "So I drugged him when I prepared his meal, slipped out to warn you of the plants, and tell you how I came here. Ever since we landed, I have lived only for the day when I might escape from the living nightmare of Zilda. Duck low here and make no sound, for here is the only way into the crater bowl which the plants cannot enter." She rolled aside a hinged slab of jet and quartz-veined lava basalt as she spoke, revealing a narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a body but certainly too low and narrow for the larger, sprawling plants to come through. "Thorson showed it me once when we gathered roots and berries," Lunara explained as they filed through the opening. "It is controlled by a luminous button, which the plants dare not touch, being afraid of light and fire." They emerged in the crater bottom, the lake shimmering in the dull, sullen glare of Xenia, hanging like an orange ball high above their heads in the purple dome of sky. "The cave is only 100 decares above us," Lunara whispered excitedly, "so if you want to capture Thorson, best do it now before he guesses we're here." "We'd best split up," Queen advised. 4 fill containers with uvonium deposits, while we others go up and tackle Thorson. You better get back to the ship and wait for us there." "But I want to stay here," the girl protested indignantly, her face eager looking in the lurid light of Xenia. "I couldn't possibly walk out now." "What touching sentiments!" A sneering voice cackled harshly behind them, and there, mounted on a rock, blaster in hand, stood a gaunt figure of a man with yellow, bald head, bony bird-like profile, and flickering green reptilian eyes. It was none other than Thor Thorson, the mad scientist dictator himself. "I feel flattered, my dear Miss Wassel. Can it possibly be that your desire to stay behind is on account of me, that you prefer to be Queen of Zilda rather than just another Terrestrian?" Quain moved behind the swinging door, his face tense, his hand on his own blaster, which, though not as powerful as Thor's weapon, which could literally disintegrate the human cells and reduce them to their lowest level in one operation, was yet sufficiently strong enough to stun anybody not protected against its rays. Thor, he was glad to notice, either from carelessness or vanity, had left off his own protective suit and was wearing a toga of delicate nylon, spun quartz-veined with silver and bronze. Pinpointing his blaster on a dull red jewel at the front of Thor's crown, Casimir Quain fired suddenly. The ray contacted the gem. Thorson howled wildly, reeled back, trying to aim his weapon, but his arms fell paralysed to his sides before he could press the contact button. Quain grabbed the blaster and covered the now unconscious Thorson with it. He knew that with this weapon he could defy not only the plant men, but their evil creator as well. Something in him urged Quain to kill his enemy, but he restrained himself. No Terrestrian punishment would be as great as exile on this nightmare paradise, eternally menaced by his own monsters. Daylight began to lighten the sky as the last container of the Wonder Ore was carried to the ship. Suddenly, as the last of the men was preparing to leave, the girl gave a wild scream. Pointing below where a thin file of green figures, wavering in the dawn light, was creeping up the mountainside towards them. Chapter 3. The Battle of the Monsters. Quain, Clint and Valtimond were alone on the crater slopes, the rest having returned to the spaceship to load the containers of priceless uvonium. Slowly, the hungry plants, led by instinct, came up the hill, Blaster in hand, Casimir Quain waited to fight what might well prove his last battle, since he did not yet know the full effect of the weapon, nor how many rounds of ammunition it contained. As he watched, fascinated, a strange thing happened. From caves pockmarking the far sides of the crater emerged fantastic shapes, huge reptilian shadows in the eerie light of dawn on the nightmare planet. Giant hangovers from an earlier age, these cells, revived by the Euvonium, had re-emerged as primitive monsters of a bygone era. Brontos, megaths, triceps, and huge back-winged pterodactyls, with bills as large as humanoids. They crawled and slithered through the mud and mists, fantastic relics of an age before time began. These monster reptiles saw or scented the plants, and a fantastic spectacle began before the fascinated eyes of the 4 spectators. Trumpeting excitedly, the megath charged into the plants, rending their twisted shoots and tendrils with its long, hairy trunk, trampling the writhing leaves and stems beneath its gigantic hooves, plunging its tusks into the twisting, heaving mass until it was smeared with purple, viscous fluid. Squealing hysterically, the vast reptiles battled with the plants and gradually succeeded in doing what modern atomics could not accomplish, destroying the loathsome blooms. Bit by bit, the prehistoric monsters destroyed the vegetable robots until nothing but stained and still-loving patches of green or purple floated on the waters of the lake. "Let's try and get back to the ship now," Quain said suddenly, forcing himself back to reality. "Come on, Miss Wassel," he added as he turned away from the scene of the battle, the hoarse croaking of the pterodactyl still ringing in their ears. "Or our nasty little friends may send up reinforcements." How many plants remained yet in the jungle there was no means of knowing, but right then there was nothing in the world Quain wanted so much as to turn tail and race away from Zilda as fast as his legs would carry him. Then things began to happen, and fast. He heard Lunara scream, saw the yellow face of Thorson grinning in triumph as he scrambled to his feet, using the half-fainting girl as a protective shield. "Don't imagine you're getting away from here, my friends. I've an army of fungoids and giant mandrakes in the caves ready to invade Terrace once we get a spacecraft, which now you are kindly providing. Miss Wassel, as my future consort, comes with me." Behind him in the cave, a dim pallid thing moved, a monstrous fungoid growth, whose body was a white stem, whose head a quivering mass of spotted pseudo-flesh. "Don't move, or I'll blast you, Thorson," Quain gritted, trying to pinpoint the skull of the grinning gargoyle and avoid the helpless body of Lunara Wassel. "Come out of the cave, and I'll let you have it." Thorson laughed, a hissing, sibilant sound, and backed faster than ever. "You'll find it impossible to hit me without killing Miss Wassel, Terrestrian," he sneered, "and I think you will hardly dare do that." Carter and Valtimond shouted a warning, but too late. The thing got to him first. Slowly but surely, its vast toadstool head enclosed the struggling man, who with an unearthly shriek dropped the barely conscious girl to wrestle with the Frankenstein he had created to be his own executioner. Dazed and sobbing, Lunara stumbled into the open. As the ship hurtled into space, their last view of Zilda was of a deceptively green and peaceful paradise, with no signs of life or movement among the flowers and trees in the clearing. "No need to look further for Libra," Quain was told when he reported at headquarters. The inhabitants were evacuated onto Beta Minor by rocket ship, and as she was radioactive, it was decided to collide her with Zilda and explode both in space. "Zilda is uninhabited," Marvin Masterton, Space Commodore-in-Chief, added carelessly, "so no damage would be done." "I'm afraid it is inhabited, Chief," Quain corrected him with a grim smile. "But from what we saw of the inhabitants, total explosion and molecular disintegration is the best way of dealing with the whole setup on Zilda." The end.